And under content definition here, select blog post, the one that you just created. For the display name here, this is where you'd probably want to use a plural form of your content definition because it's a list. It's a list of blog posts. You're not going to call it blog posts. So call it blog posts, plural. And leave the reference name as is. The reference name is important later on, not really in this session, but when you create shared content lists, the reference name is what you actually use in code to be able to look up any content that's in shared content. You just look it up by the reference name, and it retrieves you a list of those items. So we're gonna hit save on that, and now we have a list of blog posts that are empty. So next thing we're gonna do here is just create 2 items. You don't have to create too many. Just create two sample ones. So I'm going to call it sample blog post 1. And just put in some random content. And if you really want to be clever, you can create a new one, or you can just copy it. There we go. Now I have 2 items. I'm just going to change the title here, though, so that they're unique. So yeah, create two blog posts. Make sure that they have a unique title. The rest of the stuff can be the same. So now we've got this list. That's pretty cool. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to go to Pages, and here is where we're going to create a dynamic page item in Agility. The dynamic page item tells Agility how to dynamically route these. So we already have a page here called blog, or whatever you got to name the page in your system. Select that page and just click Add to add a new page underneath it. So we're going to create a child page here. When you look at the type, there's several different types of things we can create in a page tree. So far, we've just been looking at pages. This one, we're going to be selecting dynamic page. There are other things too, like folder and link, but those aren't that important. We don't need to talk about those right now. So under page template, select that blog template that we've already created. And you'll have to follow along kind of closely here. We're going to select, under the build pages from, we're going to point our dynamic page item to our list of blog posts. So we're instructing Agility to be able to link this dynamic page directly to the list. Under sitemap label here, this you would want to put, this is just the name of what the dynamic page is going to look like in your page tree. It doesn't really get used for anything else, but for the sitemap label, it's usually good practice to name it something so you remember kind of what it is. Let's just call it post dynamic. And you'll see here that there's 3 other fields here and these are all formula fields. So these are like dynamic fields, if you will. What you can do is select the button on the right to hit add field. So this will tell you what fields are available from your definition. So it knows we have a title field, so that's why it's providing this as the only option. You can only use text fields or custom fields for these. You can, for example, you can't use HTML to be part of your page path formula because, well, that would mean that you'd have HTML in the actual URL, which you don't want. So we're going to select title here.
What did you say the second type that we can put in there? Text and what?
Text and custom field, which is something we're going to talk about later. But yeah, by default, the only type of field you can use for your dynamic page path formula is the title. And really what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, this is the field we want to use for the dynamic URL slug. This is how we're instructing our routing engine in agility.web to say, hey, anything matching this URL slug, that's reloading on this URL, map it to that dynamic item. So we're going to use title for this. Hit save when you're good there. And then, so your page tree should look something like this. You'll have a static page at the top. Then you'll have dynamic page, which is shown with the little listing icon as we see here. The other thing you'll notice here is that there's this line that says this page is built from the blog posts list. So this page is linked to that list. The next thing we need to do here is we need to add a module that's going to output the details of this post. Remember, we already created a module that does that, except the problem is that one doesn't really works a different way. So we're going to modify that one. But for now, actually, before we do that, we're going to remove those fields. So you can go away from there, go back to settings, go to module definitions, and go to blog post details. So again, this is the same one we were using before. On Form Builder, just remove these fields because they're not going to be used anymore. Really, this module is not going to have any properties on it at all because our dynamic routing and our code is actually going to be using that same output template, but the code, we don't need any fields in here. So just clear the fields, remove those, hit save and close. You can ignore this module and publish thing at the top. We would be concerned about this if we were going to deploy this in live mode. Actually, go ahead and just publish it. What happened there is Agility's warning us that, hey, you made a change to this definition. Do you want to sync this to the production web server or hold off and wait until you know that it works properly? So we'll just leave that. We'll publish that. We know that it's safe. There's no problem there. The next thing we're going to do is we can go back to pages here, and on the blog page, just remove that module because we're not going to use it anymore. So your parent page, just leave that empty. Don't put anything in there. Under post dynamic, you're going to add that same module again. So just click add new module, blog post details. So when you add that module to the page, there's actually a message here saying there's no fields in here to input, but it does need to be added to the page in order for any output to happen. So let's hit save and close on that. So now we've got that blog post details now on a dynamic page as opposed to just a regular static page. And now we just need to update our code to be able to retrieve the dynamic item now. Because agility.web will automatically, based on the page path, incoming page path, it'll know what item to render, and you just need to retrieve that from memory in your code and be able to use that. So let's go and update our code now. We do need to refresh our C# API again because we didn't make a change. So again, click on that MVC over sample set underscore API, Agility CMS, and hit update model. If you don't have the Visual Studio extension, you can install it now, or do it the old-fashioned way by downloading it from the manager and replacing it. Sorry?
Yeah, so if you bring the fields from the module. I did that. Yeah, I'll go to DOS bloggers, DOS login, and go here to remove blog post details from the and then add a dynamic page. Gotcha. Well, then you added it again. Oh, no, that's part of that.
But you will have to save that. You just go into that warnings. Go in there and save it. Because if you don't save it, it doesn't force you to item one page. Now it's all on the page.
Cool, thank you.
Can I do like some more?
UGC's, oh yeah, that works a bit differently because it doesn't actually get synchronized. It's just a REST-based API. So when you submit something and then you want to immediately look it up, there's actually a way of passing in what's called a cache key.
Okay.
Because by default, when you search records using UGC, it can be cached for some time to keep it high performance. So if you insert something, you pass in a cache key, and then when you search for it, you just make sure that you vary that cache key. Or actually, wait, no. No, when you save it, you pass in the same cache key you used to be able to search. So then when you consequently search afterwards, the cache is refreshed. So that just when you save it, it just busts the cache. Although I think there might be a bug in that. Maybe. So if you have trouble, let me know. Okay. So now that we've got this module that has no fields on it on our dynamic page, the next thing we need to do is update our code to be able to retrieve that dynamic item. So we're going to go back into our code here, go to controllers, open up blog controller, and we're going to leave most of this the same, except we're going to add something different. We can actually just copy this from here again. Yeah, you can copy this code directly from slide 12.10, and you can just copy all of that and paste it directly into Visual Studio. There's actually, if you pay attention, there's only like a couple lines of code have changed here. So let's walk through this code a little bit. Before, we were just taking the module that had all the blog post properties we needed and pass it to the view. Now we're doing something a little bit different. We have a line here where we're looking up the blog post and we're retrieving the current dynamic item. Because Agility will automatically know what item you're trying to reference on that page based on the incoming URL. So all you need to do is just retrieve a reference to that content item in memory using that one line. And you're passing the type as well. That blog post type is also auto-generated through that C# API. So if you had named your content definition ABCD, you would pass it to ABCD. And the type that's there. And then we have an extra line of code here, which is just checking some stuff for us. It's saying, hey, if there's no dynamic item in here, this is probably a 404. So we're just going to throw a 404 HTTP exception in here. You don't really need this because agility.web will just throw a 404 anyways. But sometimes it's good to just double check these things.
Will this one override the default one if you do put one in here?
No, I think it might even 404 before you get here.
Oh.
Yeah. Or does it? I don't remember now. I have to check. And then we're still returning the exact same partial view, but the difference is the view model we're passing to that view is no longer the module, it's the definition itself of blog post. So if we go to our view, we're going to make one small little update to our output view, and the rest will stay the same. So we're going to go to views, blog post details, and you'll see here that immediately Visual Studio is complaining about my code. That's because our module underscore blog post details no longer has any of those fields. Remember, we removed those and then we refreshed our C# API. So we need to just change our type here because the type we're passing into this view is of type blog post, not module blog post details. So you can just change this to blog post. And those red squiggly things should go away. Sometimes they don't. And then you're going to have to build your website. So there we go. Now we've built that. Now what you can do is you're going to have to manually sort of browse directly to whenever you don't have a listing view yet to know what the URLs are. So under your local host, you're going to want to formulate a URL that matches a certain pattern. So whatever your parent page is in your tree, for example, if it's just blog, then it should be what I have here, blog / and then there'll be a friendly version of the title. So whatever title you named your blog post, just replace the, well actually you can just paste in that title directly, even with whitespace characters, it'll automatically redirect to a lowercase thing. So for example, I had named one of my things sample blog post 1. When I go to that, you'll see that the request comes in with the whitespace characters, and it'll actually, agility.web will still figure this out and redirect all to lowercase and make it a friendly URL for you. So you'll see here, now just redirected to blog sample post -1. And my output is exactly the same as what I had before. So really the only thing we've changed here is that now this page is rendering from the dynamic page, and all of our content is stored in shared content and easily accessible across the site. Does anyone have any troubles trying to access their dynamic page URL?
Stay on target.
And if you enter some other URL that doesn't exist, it'll 404. So this is really like dynamic pages and agility are just like there's a lot of ways that it just helps you do lots of things, right? So it automatically does the dynamic URL routing for you, automatically gives you an instance of an item that you can just grab from memory in your code. But of course, you can always just go and implement this however you normally want to do it. You could create your own wildcard route in your route config that works with any sort of other content item in agility. You could build this totally and not use dynamic pages at all. But it is there, and we recommend using it where possible. One of the other advantages of using dynamic page items is that each one of these items we created from our blog post, you'll see that it actually has page-level properties. You'll see it under the SEO tab. There's things like meta keywords, meta description, any scripts that need to be executed on that dynamic page. So really, we're abstracting these pages from being in the page tree into shared content. A note on scripts, these would be things like adding Google Analytics scripts or like marketing tracking pixels, something like that. Don't rely on this for core JavaScript functionality of your modules because editors tend to screw this up and it's not very friendly for them if they need to know certain things to put in for things to work. Are there any questions on dynamic pages and how those work or why you might want to use them? Cool.
Adrian had a good question actually.
Yeah. Yeah, what was it?
It doesn't give you an error when you actually create the same title for a different blog post. How does Agility Developer handle that?
I just choose the first one on the list, I believe. But yeah, so there is when you create that title field, there's actually an option there to mark the value as unique, so that if someone creates, we didn't do that in our step, we probably should have. But if you create another item, if you go back to that content definition and mark the title as being marked as required, then when you try to create a new content item with the same title, it'll give you an error. You won't be able to save it. Now, can anybody see a problem with the way we set up our page path formula? We're setting it on the title field.
That field not exist anymore.
Spaces?
Well, I mean, yeah, Agility.web handles the spaces by default just to make it easy for you. But think about it from an editor perspective. They go in there and they're like, hey, this blog post is cool, but I want to change the title of this. They just go and they change the title. That means that your URL now is entirely going to change. The editor might not realize that that's going to happen. So now all of a sudden you might have another page somewhere else with a static link to this page, and then it'll 404.
Is that if you link it by its slug name? Is that like the problem that the slug name is now changed, sort of?
Yeah, exactly. Like the slug name is changed. You just inadvertently changed the URL without even realizing it. Yeah. So normally, what you would do, I don't think we'll have time to demo this in full today, but we have something called custom fields, which allow you to do a lot more advanced things. So I want to take you guys through. Just you don't have to don't worry about following along with me. I just want to show you how you might implement something here to provide a more better experience for the editor. So
there's a thing about SEO you might want to mention is the fact that using a title for your SEO title actually isn't a really good idea. What you should be doing is having SEO title descriptions as separate elements in your blog posts so that you can control the length, especially when it's being displayed and shared or served, how it's being served up in search. All that stuff needs to be controlled in a much tighter way than when you have just editing.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? When you're using fields for multiple different things, sometimes it's better to split those out into individual fields so editors really know what they're changing and what it's going to affect. Yeah, great point. Oops, that's not what I want to do. I'll come back to that afterwards. So there's this, we have a concept of custom fields. I'm just going to jump down to our repository link because I forgot where it is. So we have this documentation on GitHub for how to create custom fields. Custom fields allow you to create new field types of whatever you want to be able to do in the CMS using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So we've got a couple examples of some custom fields that we've built and you guys can use. We're going to be continuing to add more things here. We have a bunch of custom fields we've used over the years, so we want to make sure we add all that stuff in there so you guys can take advantage of it too. If you want, you can contribute to this repository as well, or just keep it for yourself, it's fine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new custom field called a friendly URL, and this is kind of how it's going to work. I'm going to have another field that I'm going to add to my block list here, and I'm going to call it like URL slug. So then it's very clear that this is what controls the URL for this dynamic item. There's a regenerate URL button, which will just regenerate it based off the title, and then you can modify it afterwards. It'll also, if you try to change it after you saved it, it'll show you this message. So it's very clear to the editor, hey, by changing this, this is going to have other ramifications. Are you okay with this? So this is an example of just one custom field. So I'll show you what it's like to install one of these. What we're going to do is go to JS. There is an initialization script here. Let me just copy that. Whoops.
Should we be following along?
No, I wouldn't worry about this. I'm gonna I'm gonna blaze through this because there's a couple steps here, and we are working to try to make this a bit easier. So I'm gonna copy some JavaScript code, a function. I'm gonna go to settings, and I'm gonna go to inline code. And under JavaScript here, I actually have a file here called custom fields. My screen is so small. I have no height. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste this code in here. What this file is that it's a sort of a customization file that gets actually loaded in from the content manager on load. So you'd set this up beforehand that you want the content manager to load this customization file. And I have a function here called friendly URL form. And then I also have a registration function. So it tells our content manager application, says, hey, register this as a custom field type that can be used. So this function here has a couple things in here. A label, as if what did I want the name for my custom field type to be. So when I create a new content or module definition, I can see my custom field by name and I can add it to a field. There is a render function that gets called every time the init form loads. So it can get called over and over again if you're saving it and you're staying on the same page. There is a template variable here. So this is actually referencing another inline code file. So it's telling me where my HTML template for my custom field is. This could also just be an absolute URL to some HTML file hosted somewhere else. But if it's in this format, it'll just read it from inline code. I have the options to specify some JS dependencies and CSS dependencies. So if I have a really complicated custom field type, you can add individual files and those just get loaded in terms to make sure that everything you need is sort of preloaded. And then there's a view model. The view model sort of represents, if you're familiar with MVVM, the view model is the objects and the methods you're working with. And the HTML is the stuff you're going to bind that to. Content Manager is written in Knockout. So while you don't really need to know how Knockout.js works, it's helpful to understand how observables work because that's how you set values of items and be able to access properties of other content items on the same form. Then we just have some functions here that do some stuff. So now that I've added this in here, I'm going to hit save and close. And I got to add one more thing here. I need to add my HTML template. So I'm just going to go back into my repository here. And yeah, again, if you're familiar with Knockout, you can use Knockout bindings in here, if statements, if you want. I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to paste that in. I'm going to double check my instructions on this. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So friendly URL field. I'll hit save and close on that. Now I've got my my template there. Let me just verify that my reference name for my template does match. Oh, it doesn't. Friendly URL template is what I used. All right, so now I've made that update there. Because I have made a change here and I've essentially installed a new custom field type, I need to refresh my content manager. So I'm going to refresh that. I'm going to go back into pages here. Sorry, not pages, content definitions. And I'm going to open up my blog post here, go to form builder. I can click add. And we've always been looking at standard fields. Now we can actually look at custom fields. So I'm going to call this URL slug. And under custom fields here, I can select my friendly URL. Save and close. I should probably mark that as required. And then I can drag this just below the title so that it's, they're creating the title and they can see the URL slug immediately after. I hit save and close. Now I can go back into shared content and open up one of these guys. And I can just hit regenerate URL. So that's now going to generate this off of my thing. If I hit save, yeah, anytime you hit regenerate, this will tell you this. But you're also always free to just be like, okay, well, let's say I want this to be, just called post one. Go here. So now I have a new field that I want to be able to use as my URL. So now I can just go back to my dynamic page here, go to the SEO tab, and change this up. So I'm going to clear this field, add field URL slug, and I want to leave page title and menu text just to be the same. I'll leave that the same. So now I'll hit save. So now I've made a change to how my route handles. Notice I haven't made any changes in my actual code base yet, and I don't even need to, because Agility syncs these dynamic formulas just like regular content. So it's going to update essentially on the fly. So now I can go back into here, and I should be able to just go directly to post-1. And now I have the same thing. So custom fields are really handy because if there's something you're trying to do and it's not out of the box, it's very easy for you to be able to just add your custom field and actually build your own fields in there. The cool thing about custom fields is the way that you build them is when you build them one way, they're going to work for every single module, content depth, and across any Agility instance. Unless you have very specific code in there that integrates with other APIs and things. But to give you some ideas of what else you can use custom fields for, we've had people build custom fields that query an external database to validate items. Or for one of our e-commerce customers, when they create a new product and they put in a SKU, and it's going to go and validate through their dynamics to make sure that product exists in their system. Yep.
So historically, if we wanted to do cascading fields, we would have to write JavaScript into the Agility CMS in order to handle that. Would you now instead use custom fields to do that, or?
I would probably recommend using custom fields for that. Yeah, the other way of sort of customizing the platform itself, I would not recommend. Yeah, custom fields would be better for that kind of stuff, because then in custom fields you have access to the values of all other fields, and they're updated as people are typing in real time, right? So there's sort of two-way bindings happening there. So you could have a series of custom fields that hold all those values that hide and show themselves based on the values of other items.
Cool. That's much better than what we asked.
Yes, much better to maintain. And every time you add a field, you don't have to go and mess around with the other JavaScript. Yeah, much better way of doing it. The last thing I want to sort of touch on here is now that we have our dynamic page here, we're missing probably one of the most important things, which is actually having a listing view of iterating and querying and showing all of these lists for our blog posts. So just because we're a bit short on time, I don't think we'll be able to go through this together. But again, let's just walk through how you might do it. So before I go ahead and give you guys all the answers, how do you guys think, just high level, that should work? How would you create a module that lists all of the blog posts we've just created and have the full URLs to those dynamic pages.
Create a list of type blog posts and iterate through it.
Well, yeah, we already have a list of blog posts, yeah. But you said it right. We iterate through it, right?
Yeah.
You just need to be able to have a module that looks up the list of blog posts, loops through them, and outputs the properties of the module, right? And one advantage of that URL slug thing is that now we actually know what field is being used for the URL. So we can build our URLs manually in code. Alternatively, there is another method you can use to be able to retrieve whatever the current dynamic page formula is to get the URLs, but I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do here, and I'll just do this kind of quickly here, is keep clicking that. Under settings, we're going to create a new module definition. And I'm just going to call this like blog listing. And under fields here, I could actually just leave this empty because in my code, I could just, memorize what the reference name is for my blog post list and just query that list and iterate through them. The problem is what if I don't know the reference name to my list? That could be a bit challenging. So I'll show you another way of doing it. We can create what's called a link content field here. So I can create a field here called blog posts. And under field type, I can select linked content. A link content field type means that you're able to point this field to another list and then be able to interact with that list. So you can create table relationships, content association. This is how you would actually build another layer onto blog posts, like being able to add a category or a number of categories or tagging or keywords. Is you would use a link content field, and then you can render that field in different ways. So you can render the field as a drop-down, you can render the field as a search list box where you can search and get IntelliSense on things and select numerous items. And then that'll save the content ID of those items, and then in your code, you can just look up the details of those items and then be able to use that in your code. What we're going to do here is we're actually just going to create a link content link that is on the module. So now the module essentially knows what list it's linked to. And then in your code, you can actually be kind of dumber in your code and say, oh, just give me all of these things from this field, as opposed to knowing what the reference name is in code. So I'm going to select blog post in my content definition. Under content view, I want to select shared content, and then I can select blog post. So I'm essentially hard coding saying, hey, this module is going to output this list of contents from blog posts. And I have numerous render as options. If I chose grid, that would show my blog post in a grid, just like a little snapshot of what my current blog posts are, which would be cool. Or I can just do link, which is the button that goes to the post. Or there's also other fields here for drop-down list, checkbox, and search list box. So that allows you to sort of, check off multiple things and save multiple IDs of things we want to interact with. But I'm just going to select link for this just for simplicity. I'll hit save and close. Under output template here, I'm going to select partial view and website, and I'm going to type in views, blog listing.cshtml, save and close, go to pages, go to my blog page, which is going to be my parent page that has my listing, and I can just select blog listing. You'll see here, this is how the link content link field renders as. It's just saying, hey, it's just linked to this list. It also gives me a shortcut just to go to shared content directly and see those items there. So now I'll hit save and close. And then I'll go back into code here. I'm going to refresh my models. Bam, that's done. Now I'm going to go to my folder where I have blog, and I'm going to create a partial view for that. So we call this blog listing. And then I actually have some code here that I can grab. There we go. Bam. So you guys don't have to watch me like painfully type all this stuff out and make mistakes. Oh yeah, I was in my example here. I had a title on the module called blog post, but I'll just remove that. So now this is just going to show me all my blog posts. So first, let's show you what this looks like when I build and run it, and then we'll step through the code a little bit and see how we did it. All right, cool. That's not the page. This is the page. Oh. CSHMTL. That's not a thing. There we go. So now we have a very basic listing view where we've got links to each one of these items. You'll see here, I can click on that. It takes me to my blog post 2, which has the details of my blog post in here. So basic listing view. So now let's step through the code a little bit here. Let's get this stuff out of the way. So we've got, this is a partial view. I did it in this way just because it's just the quickest way to show everything all in one go. So we're not looking through files, but normally this code should probably be in a controller, and then you have a custom view model to pass that to your view. But it's here just for example. So we have one line there at the top that says posts. Post equals model.blogpost.items. So that's going to enumerate the entire list of posts that we have. It's just going to grab all of them. And again, that's grabbed from the content repository. So there's no calls being made externally to any database, no APIs, no external calls whatsoever, all happening on the server itself. And so you're enumerating all of the posts. And then this is another way to do the exact same thing. It's just a shortcut. So that link content field that we added in that module, it really just gives us a shortcut to know what the reference name is, and we can do model.blog post get items. But if we didn't know the reference name, or we didn't have a link content field on the module, and we just wanted to grab a content list in Agility, that's how we would do it. New Agility content repository, pass in the type, you need that to be strongly typed, and then pass in the reference name and enumerate items. Then you can also do a lot of other stuff too. So this items call has a bunch of overloads. If my IntelliSense works, come on. All right, well, let's take a look at this then. Different parameters for this stuff. This is probably one of the most used calls in Agility. Items gets you everything. You can pass in a row filter. So a row filter will is the standard data view syntax. So you can filter by multiple properties and or not, etc. To be able to just query that list and only get the ones that you need. Of course, you can also just use link after the fact to get the whole collection, then just use link to be able to filter that down, but not as performant. I saw your face, you're like, ugh.
Yeah, like it's probably not returning it, what the interface is called. Not IEnumerable, but the one that actually comes back.
Yeah, what comes back would come back.
Queryable.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a queryable item. But again, all of these things aren't coming from a database anyways. They're just being read from content files. So there's really no performance hit there. But yeah, it's still good to use the row filters in here where possible. And there's also some extensions as well, sort by IDs, get by IDs, and a few other things. So that's how you query content in Agility. It's pretty straightforward. And the other thing I wanted to show you guys was, our view down here is we're just looping through all of our posts that we have and showing the details. The thing I want to highlight here is two things. One is the help or get post link. The other one is, again, we're using a thumbnail here to show that big image that we had as our main blog details, but as a small thumbnail. So we didn't have to get the editor to upload another image, we just thumbnailed it automatically. The get post link, there are numerous ways that we could get the link for these dynamic posts. One way is we could just literally put in code here blog / the URL slug of the post. That would give us the same result. However, if the dynamic field for that page changes at any point, that's going to break, right? Because maybe you're not using that as dynamic formula anymore, and all those URLs are going to break if that changes in the manager. So there is this method here, which not a lot of people know about, which allows you to actually retrieve the dynamic URL for the current Agility content item. So normally you'd probably have this implemented as a class on the object itself. So for example, in the sandbox, we actually have another dynamic list called products. And what we've actually done here is in the models here, you'll see that there's this product underscore partial CSHTML. This has the same method here. So all you need to do is just pass in the page path to your dynamic page, and then a reference to that same content item. It'll just figure out what the URL should be for that item, so you'll know the details. So that covers dynamic pages. Are there any questions around dynamic pages, routing, listings, querying content? All right, cool. Pretty much reaching what I definitely wanted to cover today. The only other thing, yes, deploying your website. That was also one of the burning questions, so I want to make sure let's cover that now. This is really easy to do. It'll also take a few minutes. So what I want you guys to do, if you have a build that is working, if you have one that isn't working, we can help you. But if you do have a build that is working right now, you can go ahead and deploy that. So what you're going to do is you're going to right-click on the project and follow along if you can on this. You're going to hit publish. This isn't anything Agility specific, by the way. Like your hosting environment can be wherever it needs to be. In this case, your hosting environment is an Azure App Service, so it makes it really easy to deploy stuff. So I'm just kind of going through that right now. So when you hit publish here, you don't have any published profiles selected. So it's going to say, how do you want to deploy this? You click this menu thing and hit import profile. So again, right click the project, hit publish, select import profile from the list. And once you have that selected, depending on what version of Visual Studio you have, this might look a bit different too.
We got to pick a published target first. As soon as before the screen, did I miss one?
You might have to scroll to the right. Oh, it's a different Visual Studio. Import profiles.
Oh, yeah. If you see another option saying an import publish profile or a deployment profile, click on that instead.
And what am I importing?
Yes, good question. So once you've selected, if you're in 2017, you'll select create profile from import. And so now you'll have the file browser up. Now what you're going to want to do is browse to the place where your source code is, where you've extracted your source code. So for me, I just extracted it straight in my downloads. Should be the latest one here. And open up S. Remember, this is I alluded to this file earlier on. This is your published profile. So select that file. It should have the extension publish settings. And just go ahead and click open on that. And so now this initializes multiple ways to be able to deploy your website. You'll see from the drop down here, you can do web deploy or you can do FTP. Do web deploy. Web deploy is awesome. So when you're ready to go here, it should just be one-click publish. Now, it's important to note too, while this is deploying, it should only take a few seconds. It doesn't take very long. All the stuff we did today is in staging mode. We haven't published anything. So our server here, we can preview the stuff that we've done after it's been deployed, and everything will work, but we haven't actually published it yet. So we can go ahead and publish those things first. Let's just make sure this actually works. So I'm already in preview mode here, so I can go directly to blog, and I can verify there's my listing view, and I can click on this, and there's my dynamic page again. Now, if I exit preview mode, I'm going to get a 404 here because this page has never been published. So to fix that, well, one thing I'm going to do here is I got to publish my module def. If you haven't published your module definition, do that now. Otherwise, you will get an error, and you'll see. And then now I'm just going to go ahead and publish my page. Publish my dynamic page. I'm also going to go to shared content, and my list of blog posts, I'm also going to need to publish those as well. So you can say publish at the top, and it'll publish the whole list.
Do we still have the publish all function somewhere?
That was it there. Well, oh, there is that. Yeah, there are many different ways to publish stuff. What I just did right there was like the dumb way, like going through each item and clicking publish. But yeah, great point. We have a report here, which actually, if you go to reports, there's a ready to publish report, and this will show you all items that are currently in staging. So if you want to just be like, I wanted to publish everything I did today, you could go here and just publish everything that's selected from this list. So one way to publish a bunch of stuff. Or you do what I did and just had them ahead of what I knew to go ahead and publish, and I did that. There's also batches, which is a newish feature that we have that allows you to group together different items of content and sort of keep that as a personal batch. So then later on, you can go back and publish that batch.
Can you schedule those?
Yes, you can schedule batches as well. Cool. So as opposed to like going to many different places and set that individual scheduling on each item, you can do it all in one place and have it all go out at once. And so now that everything is published here, I should be able to just refresh. Oh, there we go. And now that works. I'm not going to cover that today. This is my favorite slide, by the way. I was like, what? You can do background videos on this?
It's PC right now.
Sorry?
It's PC.
Oh yeah. I was actually, even in Ontario, I was supposed to go camping 2 weeks ago, and my campsite got burned out or smoked out. So I went to Detroit instead. Very different kind of trip.
So if you're publishing to Azure Web Apps, I mean, historically you have your Agility content folder sitting outside. Where is it sitting now?
So the way that Azure App Service works is that no matter how many instances of that you may have, they all actually share the same file system. So when a sync request comes into the load balance endpoint, whatever server accepts that request, because it might be a pool of 3 maybe, whichever one accepts the request, it tells the other instances not to accept any other sync requests. So like that is now becoming the syncing server for this sync request. And then it does the content sync in the shared file system. And then everything else just updates automatically. And Agility.web has file dependencies or cache dependencies on the files. So when those files gets refreshed, the cache that all of the servers have get refreshed. So as soon as something is published, there is output caching enabled by default across the board. So it'll just take off the output caching for that affected page, and all of your servers will get that update immediately.
It used to be, and it's been a while since we built it, but the Agility content folder used to live outside of your actual website, and then you would get blocking issues with your IIS user if you try to do anything from the file system. So that's why
you don't have to worry about that anymore, because the way Azure App Service works is, well, it does so much work for you already, but you have a sort of a file system that you can access sort of within a little sandbox, and the content repository just sits within there. So the app has all the resources it you need to do that, and Agility.web automatically handles any sort of file locking problems that you might have there.
So there's no issues with horizontal scale?
No, none at all. None at all. That's what's awesome about Azure App Service, and that's why I recommend it highly. It works very well with Agility, especially since you don't have before, when you had like a server farm, you had 10 servers. You'd have to have the content repository replicated on all 10 servers. Which you can still
open ports and do routing through our load balancer.
Yeah, it's a lot more setup, right? Azure App Service actually handles that entire architectural problem for us out of the box, which is awesome.
And are you using the Azure sort of cloud whitelist for access to the web service for pushing content, or how is that being locked down in any way? How are you managing that?
Yeah, so our content server is like our entire infrastructure, actually, our platform infrastructure, content manager, content server, those are all in app services as well. We know the pool of addresses that those are going to come from. So when you set up your own hosting environment, you can ensure that you set up appropriate whitelisting to only allow requests coming in there.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's how you would handle that. Cool. So I think we should address some of these burning questions now. I know it's getting kind of late and people are getting kind of hangry, so I'll try to keep this short. Yeah, your question around the dynamic menu system.
It's a little bit, because I also want to go, like, how do you do it also handle sub-pages? Like, so, I'm not sure, we have like a sample page, we can show you what we mean, but like, so like we have like settings right there with like blogs, what if we have like, you know, different types of blog posts underneath that, how can we build those different subcategories to be dynamically populated within that menu as well?
Right, so when you say the blogs, are the blogs like individual pages within the page tree, or?
No, you kind of think of it like Joe's blog, Susan's blog, Bob's blog. Subcategories underneath the heading of blog.
So what you would do there is, I mean, there's lots of different ways you can generate a menu. If it's always just based off of the sitemap, it's easy because you can use the sitemap provider and just loop through those. Okay. But when you're starting to mix other sort of definitions and associated content, that's where it gets a little confusing, and the sitemap provider alone isn't going to do that job for you. So you have to add in some additional logic to to look up that content and sort of manually build that dynamic menu. Sometimes it's really complicated to do that. So it might even be better for you to actually just build, instead they don't use the sitemap provider, and just build your own sort of content definition for your header. And in there you can have all these fields for, what goes here, what goes here, what goes here, what list of links show up here, what list of links show up here. You can sort of customize your own content schema for how that header is supposed to look. Okay. That might be easier for you.
All right.
Yeah. The other way I've done it in the past too is you can still use a sitemap provider, but then define in your global header sort of, if there's any pages there that are like special pages, like a blog, and then you have some other associated things you want to show there, then you can sort of register that in your content item to say, hey, this is my setting for this special page. If I'm looping this sitemap and I find this page, do something different. Okay. Maybe another way of doing it. There was questions on pricing. I think that was you, right? So I can't speak exactly what our prices are, because it does kind of depend on a few different things, but generally the way that we work it is a subscription model. So you pay either monthly, quarterly, or yearly for subscriptions, and that either includes the base CMS, like the core web content management. It could also include some additional features such as e-commerce or personalization or search. It includes access to the CDN and certain bandwidth limits there and storage limits. It also includes support, and it may or may not include hosting. So hosting is a big question. We do offer hosting. We only offer Azure App Service hosting. So if that doesn't meet your requirements, you would have to host externally. So you sort of factor that into play. But generally, the subscription covers the whole licensing to use the content management system. Prices range from about as low as, I don't know, I want to say like $500 a month to thousands, depending on what features you have and what sort of demand you need.
Did we see anything in today's presentation that would be one of the extras or the added value, or did we just see sort of your basic configuration?
What you saw today, this is the basics. This is the core component of Agility. Everything sort of built on top of that. What we saw today, there's nothing there that is an extra charge. Oh. This is what all Agility customers get, right? So when we're introducing developers, we want to focus on this first, because that's the thing that you're going to use almost all the time. And then there's other things like user-generated content, e-commerce, personalization. Those are all entire workshops on their own. And that's certainly something that we are planning to do in the next little bit. Is we want to sort of break out these sessions to cover individual things and more, and sort of do more of a deep dive, because today we just sort of learned the basics. So we want to sort of continue with this. Hopefully we get to see you guys again. You come for another one and learn some more stuff. We talked about deployment Azures, partnerships. What was the one around partnerships? I think that was how you can get more customers. Yeah.
We have a client, they lose the code.
Yeah, a client that, sorry?
They lost their code, like they don't need code.
They are developing their own code? Yeah.
So how we can go back? Because everything in your server, so we want to go back to because the client, they lose everything.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. There was a problem where another partner built a solution, and then
They do not want to give us this.
and then they didn't want to keep the customer for whatever reason, and they lost the source code to the site or something like that. It was not available, and now you, poor soul, have to figure it out.
So what is the solution?
That one's a tough one, because it's not something that I can really speak to. It was a site that was built by another partner entirely, another dev shop. We don't own the source code for any websites that are being built. So as partners in the dev shops for you guys host and manage your own source code. Oxford, I know we host your source code right now. That's just eventually that will change. We'll talk about that later. But generally speaking, we don't host any source code. We try to recommend customers to host their own source code, so that way they can, if they change up partners for whatever reason, they have access to the source code. Or again, if you guys are dumping a customer for whatever reason, please be nice and provide the source code so the next partner can at least have something to start from. But sometimes there's political reasons for these things, and I'm not going to get into that right now. So. Where to put JavaScript and CSS? I think that was your question, right? Yeah. So what we talked about today was mainly around where the code for modules and page templates and stuff go. Generally speaking, there are many different ways you could architect your website, so it kind of depends on what solution you're looking for. But I find as best practice, and what works for me, and is just generally the simplest solution, is that each one of your modules would have a JavaScript file and a CSS file. And then you need to make sure that you have a couple different options. One is you could bundle all of your CSS and JavaScript together all in one file and just serve that for your page. So when someone hits your website on page A, it's going to have all the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript for page B, and then that gets cached into the browser. So when you go to the page B, you already have all the CSS and HTML to render everything, so that second page is a lot faster. Plus, you have all the code you need to be able to do that. So I'd always prefix CSS rules to be something to do with the module. So the CSS rules you're adding correspond to a specific module. And then same thing with the JavaScript. JavaScript should be scoped to that specific module as well. There are many different ways to do this. There's lots of client-side frameworks out there. That's also one of the things that I want to do for more workshops, is showing how you can use a lot of popular front-end frameworks out there with agility in a way that sort of makes sense. So some of the things that we have on our list coming up are React, and we've actually had a lot of developers here that have well, actually not here. There was a guy that was supposed to come today, but he didn't show. He's built many sites using React and agility, and he loves it. So I'm going to be working with him and a couple other developers that I know to build a sort of agility starter template. And this is how you do it with React, and sort of general guidelines there. We're going to do the same thing for Vue.js as well, which is another super popular front-end framework. And we're going to release one for Knockout.js as well, because it's what we were using internally, and I just have a starter template for that already, so we're going to put that up. But yeah, to answer your question, there's a lot of different ways to be able to do it. But generally speaking, yeah, like one CSS file for module, one for JS, and then either bundle it all together or load it sort of asynchronously. And then REST API and SDK, I think that was Adrian's question. He was saying, are there cases where you can combine both of them? Yes, there is, and I think what he was getting at was that he has an application on the front end where he does like front end work, and he just wants to consume data and then do all of his logic using JavaScript, which is perfectly fine. So one of the ways you can do that is the module itself in Agility can actually output all the sort of initialization logic that you need, like the thing that initializes the JavaScript function or whatever. And then in your, one or two things can happen. You can either decide to take the data that you need in the backend in C# and serialize that to JSON, and then pass that JSON into like your JavaScript model to be able to sort of hydrate that. And then you don't even have to make an API call at all. You just have all the data you need directly within your JavaScript model. That works pretty well, and it's fairly well performant, especially because you have output cache. Another way to do it is to only have the module output the template for the client you need, and there's no data access whatsoever. And then you can have one or two ways of doing it. You can use the built-in REST API to query your own Agility content to return as JSON. That's one option. The other option is you can just build your own MVC controller action results, get the Agility content by reference name, and just output that as JSON, and then consume your own API. So you can either use the built-in REST-based API if you want something just out of the box and works, or if you want to, fine-tune and tinker something and be able to do some more data manipulation or linking, or trying to create your own little custom API. It's probably better to create your own MVC controller action result and then just return that as JSON. Any other questions or anything that may have come up from this workshop today?
So like, if you want to export your module, like a content list, right? Can we import that to another content list, another page kind of thing? Or does it have to be on like the same, I guess?
So you're saying like you have a page that has a module and it has some data already initialized on the module. You want to export that and then import that into a shared content list? Yeah, you can do that. So you can actually do that out of the box using the import-export functionality within Agility. So you could export the module in an Excel format, and then you can, as long as the field names all match up, you can import in to a content list with the right reference name. But the content definition that you have to import it into has to have the exact same field names.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you then import that list to another page?
Well, lists themselves don't get associated to pages. Lists would get associated to modules on a page.
Okay.
So any sort of content list you create, you can link to any sort of field. So any list you create in Agility can be linked to any content list you create in Agility can be linked to any type of field.
Okay.
So if you create a slider that is only scoped to one page, you could, in theory, actually be able to export that and import that into a different page and then link it to the same list. So that now two pages link to the same list. You can do that. It's kind of flexible in that manner. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. All right, let's go eat and drink some beer. Thanks, guys.